So welcome everyone to the Humanities student talk of the 6th Polygence Symposium of Rising Scholars. My name is Aidan Quinn. I come to you from the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and I will be moderating today's talk. The goal of the symposium today is to celebrate and showcase the hard work of our Polygence scholars, all of whom have been tirelessly worked on their projects over the past couple of months. We have 3 student presenters presenting today on a variety of topics. A fellow Polygence mentor will be scoring each student's presentation, which will help us determine prize winners after the event. Please type your questions into the chat if you have any for each speaker. We will allot 2 minutes for questions at the end of each presentation. So today's speakers are, first up is going to be Achyut Iyengar, followed by Joy and Ndamukunda. And finally, our last speaker will be Kirthi Shankar. So Achyut, if you want to take over, it is your time to go.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Achyut Iyengar, and I wrote a review paper on the history of schizophrenia called Schizophrenia in Modern Times. I chose this topic for the paper because mental well-being has become a great interest due to multiple factors coming together, like war, COVID lockdowns, and so on. Of these, one of the most significant mental conditions is schizophrenia. Today, I'll be going over the concept of schizophrenia, its early portrayal, post-World War discoveries, and the modern view of it. Before I start off with the facts, I want to emphasize why it's important to study mental illnesses like schizophrenia. To start, it affects around 3.2 million Americans, making it a widespread disease. Being able to study mental illnesses like schizophrenia allows for changes in the public's perceptions of mental health. With new research being conducted, a higher understanding can be achieved and public awareness can be raised in order to get the facts straight. Today, the main area of focus is to spread the concept of mental well-being to the youth so they can create an effective lifestyle that eliminates the chances of developing mental illnesses. Being able to understand why it's important to monitor mental health is key to ensuring a better future for our generation. So, what is schizophrenia? Simply put, schizophrenia is a chronic health disorder that impairs cognitive ability. It is recorded that schizophrenia affects around 1% of all Americans. Schizophrenia has various symptoms, but they can be labeled as symptoms that impair cognitive ability and symptoms that change brain structure. Symptoms that impair cognitive ability include disorganized speech, hallucinations, delusions, difficulty in retaining information, and rapid loss of attention. Symptoms that affect brain structure mainly consist of altered gray matter. And when gray matter is affected, symptoms related to memory loss occur more often. Early insight. Early insight into how mental health was perceived can be seen through literature and history. In 1834, the diary of one Alexei Poproshin was obtained by a tax collector named Nikolai Gogol. In it, Poproshin describes how he suddenly feels like he's losing his mind and how the world around him is constantly changing. He mentions how he feels symptoms that are now synonymous with those of schizophrenia. 3 points in his story that illustrate the similarity are his constant misspellings, such as writing Martober instead of October, hearing dogs have conversations, and his belief that he is the newfound king of Spain. He ends his diary talking about the world seemingly falling on him and his co-workers pouring water on him. This diary was important as it gave the world a vivid description of symptoms expressed by people with mental illnesses. While people like Poproshin gave their accounts while living in society, many people at this time were sent to mental asylums to be separated from society. Because of this, the patients were often mistreated with ineffective procedures, such as trephining the skull and exorcising spirits. The purpose of these procedures stemmed from religious beliefs, as religion was heavily utilized as a way of explaining them. Over time, society slowly gave up on mentally ill patients and transferred them from asylums to jails and even solitary confinement. This all changed when Dorothea Dix, a nurse, instilled a plan to treat mentally ill patients by making asylums more equipped and increasing the funds for research. Post-war discoveries. After a period of sluggish progress in research, the aftermath of World War I and II resulted in a spike of discoveries. The soldiers that came back from these wars had numerous conditions and needed help. Through research, the drug chlorpromazine was developed and helped calm the nervous system. At this time, the concept of schizophrenia was in question due to its nature of being a mental illness and not a physical ailment. Because scientists at the time didn't have a detailed knowledge of the brain, the idea of schizophrenia being a disease would still be in question and would often be confused with other mental illnesses. Modern view and significance. In modern times, however, the accessibility of modern technology, such as PET and MRI scans, has allowed the medical world to establish a firm understanding of the impacts of each mental condition. These brain scans have also led to the specification of different conditions based on their symptoms, something that couldn't be achieved in the past. A very important aspect that was achievable due to the usage of new tech was the creation of hypotheses and theories about the causes of schizophrenia. The two most recent theories are the genomic theory and dopamine theory. The genomic theory follows the idea that genetics is the main factor that causes schizophrenia and that abnormalities can cause the development of schizophrenia. The dopamine theory, on the other hand, explains that an influx of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens can cause hallucinations, which in return leads to schizophrenia. At the end of the day, understanding the physical impacts of mental illnesses like schizophrenia can enable us to create mentally sustainable lifestyles. Happiness can only be achieved by understanding what a healthy physical and mental lifestyle is. I'd like to end my discussion with a quote by David Satcher, who said that, quote, "There is no health without mental health," end quote. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to open up the floor now to any questions that anybody may have. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask them directly.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you note any like environmental causes for schizophrenia along with genetic causes?
Yeah, so in my research, it consisted more of, I think, like through I guess, genetics. So I think I mentioned the genomic theory. So that one was more prominent, but I guess there could be, causes from the environment. So I'd have to look further into that. So yeah.
Cool.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that drugs could also play a role in schizophrenia developing if a person didn't have any genetic influences that could cause schizophrenia?
Yeah, for sure. In my research, drugs seem to play a very heavy role in today's society, as some people could have healthy family lines and genetics and have healthy lifestyles, but then as soon as drugs played a role in their lives, it could change and cause them to get schizophrenia and such illnesses. So I'd agree.
When they do those drugs and they give schizophrenia, could they pass it on? Like, let's say they had a lineage, no schizophrenia, and then they did drugs. Could then their kids have schizophrenia and so on and so on?
Yeah. So with that theory, it hasn't been confirmed yet, but there seems to be a pattern, in your pattern of what you're saying, because sometimes some people can pass it on. However, it hasn't been fully confirmed, so it's still in research.
Okay.
All right, do we have any other questions from the audience? No? All right, well, thank you, Achyut, and we will move on to Joy and Ndamukunda. I'll give you the virtual floor for your presentation now.
Okay, I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see it? Okay. Hello, my name is Joy Ndamukunda, and today we'll be discussing modern-day segregation, the disproportionate representation of minority students with learning disabilities in the Houston Independent School District. Now, what are false labels? Well, in special education, labeling is a phrase used to describe the process of enrolling a student in special education and designating an eligibility category for that student. Now, I would define false labels as labeling someone as being disabled when they do not. You wouldn't be able to falsely label someone in a wheelchair because it is clearly that they are disabled. Now, though my presentation focuses solely on the Houston Independent School District, I would like to bring to the attention that disproportionately labeling minority students compared to white students is something that happens in other school districts as well. In fact, the United States Department of Education has stated that children of color with disabilities are overrepresented within special education. Now, the rates of special education designation in HISD vary significantly for students from different racial backgrounds. African-American students at HISD tend to be more likely to be over-identified as having emotional disturbance or mental impairment at schools where they make up a smaller proportion of the student body. And limited English proficient Hispanic students are underrepresented in special education for elementary while being overrepresented in middle school. An examination of the Houston Independent School System indicated that the racial mix of the student school determined whether or not he or she would be categorized as intellectually disabled. And African-American students' chances of being diagnosed with intellectual disabilities are roughly 1.5 times higher than that of a non-African-American counterpart. The odd ratios is significantly higher in elementary school with relatively low African-American enrollment. In this case, the odd ratios of African-American students who were really identified as having an intellectual disability are approximately 2.7 times that of the odd ratio of that of a non-African-American peer. Now, if you look here on this table displaying the odd ratios of African-American students being labeled as having learning disabilities, the odd ratios are larger than 1. And if the odd ratios are larger than 1, then the event is more likely to happen. All of the odd ratios on this table is greater than 1, proving that African-American students are more likely than the non-African-American peers to be labeled as having learning disabilities in elementary, middle, and high school. Now, this pie chart is supposed to show that African-American students being labeled as having learning disabilities where they make up a higher percent of the student body in comparison to where they make up a lower percent of the population. Now, I don't know why it didn't load, but it originally showed that African-American students in schools where they are a smaller percent of the student body are labeled as having learning disabilities are at a percentage of 63%, while in schools where they make up a higher percentage of the population, it is a 37%, clearly revealing that the percentage of African-American students being labeled as having learning disabilities is twice as high in schools where they're the minority of the population. Additionally, Hispanic students are disproportionately labeled as having learning disabilities as well, especially when they speak limited English. In fact, it is critical to emphasize that the degree of English proficiency of Hispanic students is closely connected to the possibility that they will be classified as being special educated. This link, however, differs between elementary school and those in HISD's middle and high schools, as shown on this table. Now, that happened to the pie chart as well, it didn't load, but just like in the pie chart for African-American students, this pie chart showcased the percentage of Hispanic students being labeled as having learning disabilities in school where they are the lesser amount of the student body in comparison where they are the majority. For the percentage of Hispanic students being the lesser, it is a 62% likely chance, and when they are the higher amount of the student body, it is a 38% chance. Furthermore, African-American and Hispanic students are more likely to take the TAKS-M modified test than white students. Now, the TAKS-M is a standardized assessment given to Texas students to determine their academic growth. The TAKS-M is the modified version of the TAKS and is usually given to students who have disabilities. With this in mind, it is important to know that the HISD school district has failed to meet the federal No Child Left Behind Act yearly acceptable progress standards for 3 years in a row, due to the district allowing too many special education students to take the modified TAKS. Hispanic and African-American students with learning disabilities are systematically more likely than white students to take the TAKS-S. Teachers who decided whether children should take the TAKS-S modified exam did so if they had any worries that the student would not score well on the TAKS or the Texas modified assessment. In other words, the default decision making was based not on competence assumption, but rather on incompatibility assessment, which infuses prejudice into how students with learning disabilities are classified. Furthermore, teachers' ability to judge whether a student should take the TAPS-M test based on preconceptions demonstrate how minority students are perceived as less capable. In these pie charts, it seemed that 2 of them loaded, but one of them did not. But here we can see that the percentage of African American and Hispanic students taking the TAPS-M in elementary, middle, and high school in comparison to white students. The percentages vary greatly, but in general, it shows that African American and Hispanic students in elementary, middle, and high school either are more likely to take the TAPS-M in comparison to white students. Now let's discuss policy solutions to this issue. Policy solution 1, to prevent prejudice and bigotry towards minority students, recruit teachers who have worked with students of color and students with disabilities in the past and come from a variety of backgrounds. Because they are less likely to have prejudice against students of color and to understand students of color and students with disabilities, teachers who have worked with students of color and students with disabilities are more dependable when assessing a student's capability and therefore should be recruited. Policy solution 1, develop a new system of labeling students as being in special education that reduces prejudice. To prevent students of color from being disadvantaged, a new system should be devised. This approach should take into account the language, culture, situation, and background of the student. Policy solution 2, accommodation of students with limited English proficiency, or LEP. This is important because by accommodating to students with limited English proficiency, we are providing students with the LEP the opportunity to reach their full potential despite their limited English. Teachers who are multilingual or have experience with working with multilingual students should be recruited. Policy solution 4, personnel administering tests should receive training in conducting these evaluations and interpreting the results in an adequate way. There should be training for teachers and administrators on which students may take the TAPS-M and which students do not. They should not rely on their own assessment of who should take the TAPS-M because this could be biased or prejudiced. Policy solution 5, examine if the student's general education curriculum employs appropriate teaching methodologies and has been altered to accommodate to the student's area of difficulty. Every student has different needs, and those needs should be met accordingly. Students with special needs should have their education altered to accommodate them. Now, is this modern day educational segregation? Well, Black and Hispanic students are the majority in HISD. As shown in this table, Black students are 23% of HISD and Hispanic students are 62%, while white students are nearly 9%. However, though white students are the minority, they are kept at an advantage while students of color are kept at a disadvantage. As described in this presentation, this can be seen as modern day educational segregation. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Joy. Do we have any questions from our fellow presenters or from our audience today?
So I saw that one of the solutions you proposed was like having more classes to accommodate for students who may like not have English as their first language. I was wondering if you thought that like language could contribute to why someone might call one of these students as like intellectually disabled.
Yes, in fact, in the presentation, I touched on that. It's very critical to emphasize that those are one of the reasons that Hispanic students with limited English are being labeled as having learning disabilities because they are viewed as less capable and less able to learn, which is why it would be very important to accommodate to their limited English.
I actually have a quick question for you. Last year, one of my research groups did a project with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation here in Omaha, Nebraska. And one of the things that we were doing was looking at racial disparities in North Omaha, which is a very segregated area of our city. One of the things we found with regards to language was that teachers were actually considering Black, or they were labeling Black students who spoke AAVE as lower learning, lower intellectual, along those lines. Is there something along that along the lines in your research that you kind of noticed that, Black students who speak, fluent Ebonics are being labeled as lower or being labeled with, sorry, my brain just stopped working, being labeled in the same way.
Well, in my research, I didn't come across regards to AAVE, but I could see how that could contribute to being labeled as being intellectually disabled, because I did see how teachers did view Black students as being, emotionally disturbed and intellectually limited, and that could be a contribution to that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? All right, I guess we will move on to our final presenter today then, Kirthi Shankar. It is all you.
All right, hello everyone. My project is how the interest of US Twitter users in environmental issues varies per region. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my mentor, Hayden Le, and also the Polygens platform. So here is a brief background on my project. A growing concern in today's society is environmental degradation and climate change, with some specific issues listed below that I'll get more into later. And social media provides a great place for people to advocate for these causes and to express their concerns. Can you let me know in the chat if you are a user of Twitter? Yeah, me too. I love Twitter. For our study, we basically look at how Twitter users talk about the environment, and also how this discussion varies depending on what region of the United States these users are from. So the questions that we'll be answering are first, research question 1A, is there a correlation between geographical distance, how close two regions are to each other in proximity, and similarity in what environmental issues they're interested in? Research question 1B is there a correlation between geographical distance and similarity in how these issues are discussed regarding what language that people use and how much they interact with each other? Research question 2 is what aspects other than geographical distance, for example, political leaning, can impact the commonalities in language use and environmental interests between Twitter users of different regions? Then, do environmental topics play a large role in Twitter discussion? Is the environment a topic that's important to Twitter users? So for collecting the data, we collected over 2 million, about 2 million tweets with the following keywords that represent overall environmental issues. Air for air pollution, coast for coastal pollution, fire for forest fires, forests for forest degradation, oil for oil pollution, plastic for plastic pollution, oil for oil drilling, plastic for plastic pollution, and soil for soil degradation. Then once we collected the text, we put it through the regular pre-processing, which involves making everything lowercase and removing punctuation. And then we removed stop words from the text, and stop words are basically words like at, the, a, which don't add meaning to context. And we also took out hashtags for later use. Once this was done, we separated the tweets based on the region the user who created these tweets were from. We separated them based on the map on the left. The regions were West, Midwest, Northeast, South, and the Pacific, which consisted of Alaska and Hawaii. So to analyze our data, first we took region summaries. Basically, we found the frequency and the relevance, which is like the TF-IDF value, for each topic in each region. This created a summary for each region of like what topics were most important to them. And we did this to answer research question 1A. Does geographical distance impact how similar or different two regions' interests are? And we also used it to answer research question 2, what factors other than geographical distance could have an impact on similarities and differences? Then we looked at hashtag similarity. As I mentioned previously, we took out our hashtags for later use. We did this because in previous studies, it's been found that hashtags can be used to represent how much interaction there is between two groups, along with the similarities, like a summary of the similarities in language use that they have. So to measure the similarity between two regions, we used cosine similarity, which I'll explain more later. And this helped us answer research question 1B, if geographical distance impacts how similar or different two regions' language uses. Lastly, we looked at environmental relevance. What we did was we took the top 30 collocations. What collocations are sets of 2 consecutive words that give like a summary of what people are talking about. So we got the top 30 collocations for each topic in each region to see if any of these subjects had to do with the environment and environmental problems. This helped us answer whether environmental issues play a large role in general Twitter discussion or not. For our results, we found that in regional summaries that there's actually no correlation between geographic proximity and similarity in importance of topics per region. We also found that, like, regarding research question 2, that regions give a relatively higher priority to topics that are related to issues that they experience. For example, the Midwest was the only region that did not have coast as its top priority. It also happens to be the only inland region without a coast. We also found that in comparison to the Northeast, the Midwest had forest as a higher priority. And we know that the Midwest has less forest cover than the Northeast, so it's more of a problem in the Midwest. The Northeast also had air as a higher priority than the Midwest. And the Northeast has more air pollution. Moving on to hashtag similarities, we found that geographical proximity between two regions does not have a correlation with linguistic similarities either. On the left, you can see a cosine similarity chart. In the top left here, you can see that we have that the West and Midwest have a cosine similarity score of 0.028. This means this is a value that represents how similar their hashtags are. And the closer the values are to 1, the more similar they are, essentially. So you can see that the West and Northeast have a greater similarity in language use than the West and Midwest, even though the West is more close to the Midwest. So that shows that, like, geographical proximity doesn't have a huge correlation with how similar the language use is. For research question 2, we found that political leaning also does not seem to have an impact on linguistic similarity. For example, the South, which is mainly Republican, and the Northeast have more in common than, the South has more in common with the Northeast than the Midwest, even though the South and Midwest are mainly Republican and the Northeast is more liberal. So lastly, environmental relevance. We found that overall, environmental issues do not play a large role in Twitter discussion. So for more specific topics like forest, plastic, and soil, which are more likely to be discussed in an environmental topic, in an environmental context, they had more potentially environment-related diagrams than the more general topics like air, fire, oil, and coast, which could be talked in like any context. However, environmental topics still do not dominate discussion for even the specific topics. We also found that the collocations represented regional issues of each region. For example, the Pacific and coast data had a lot of weather warnings. For example, you can see here winter storm, blowing snow, total snow, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so conclusions and further research. We found overall that there was no general homogeneity regarding environmental discussion in the United States. Essentially, each region talks about their own problems. This can make it difficult to advocate for issues to people who are not affected by them. And it brings up the question of how do we spread information about issues that matter to us? Based on our research, it seems as if it would be most beneficial to first tell others who are experiencing a similar issue or have previously experienced a similar issue about your current issue to spread more information. Yeah, this also brings up the question as to why does this trend occur? Is it that people are mainly interested in their own region's issues? Or is it that the Twitter algorithm itself prevents people from learning things that are not directly relevant to them? So this is definitely a question that could be further researched. Then if one wanted to track discussion about a specific issue in the future, such as like Hurricane Ida or Ida, it would be beneficial to use more specific keywords such as Hurricane Ida and not like wind to make sure that the discussion is centered around the specific issue you're tracking. That is all. Does anyone have any questions?
I do have a question. How did you take into account, because I know Twitter is usually like this, is that some people on Twitter are very passive aggressive or sometimes sarcastic in the things that they tweet. So how are you able to interpret whether they were like sincere in their beliefs? If that makes sense.
That is a really good question. We actually did not take that into account, but in future research, one could use something called sentiment analysis to see if people are being serious or not. That'll allow people to understand more of the nuances in what people are saying, but we did not look into that.
Also, because I know that like sometimes like because of like technology, they'll like promote things to a certain person who lives in a specific area who searches up specific keywords. Did you also take that into account?
Sorry, could you be more specific?
Like with like Instagram, they'll if you typically write stuff or if you like search up things or if you're in a certain area, they'll promote ads or articles to you that pertain to you because you typically search that up. Is it like I think it's like cookies or something? I don't know, I'm not for sure.
Yeah, no, I understand. Like, that is one aspect of our study that we figured out. This contributes to like the question about like the Twitter algorithm. Like, is the reason why people only talk about issues that matter to them because of this thing that you're talking about right now? Like, is it only because social media only promotes things that are relevant to them? Or is it like, do people only care about things that are relevant to them? So we did not really separate users who are tweeting on their own account versus users who are just seeing things that are given to them. But yeah, that is definitely something that should be researched and like separated in the future. Do not use Twitters. Yeah.
All right, do we have any other questions? I am going to take that as a no. It doesn't look like anybody's dropping anything into the chat. I don't see any raised hands. All right, well, I guess in that case, we are done with this session. So thank you very much to our three student presenters. You all did absolutely amazing. I was extremely impressed by the advanced statistical analyses you were actually using. So congratulations on that. And good luck. Good luck with the competition that will be happening. Oh, wait, we have a question.
Well, it's not my question, but some anonymous attendee wrote in like the Q&A, what did the panelists find surprising in their research?
Oh, all right. Yes, I see that now. Thank you. All right, all right, so let's go one by one. Let's start with Joy, because you were so kind in seeing that quick question. So Joy, let's start with you.
So what I found most surprising in my research was that, which is why like I did the research in the first place, is that African American and Hispanic students were more likely to be labeled as having learning disabilities in schools where they were the lower part of the student body rather than when they were the majority part of the student body. Because I would originally think they'd be labeled as having no disabilities in schools where they are the majority, but the fact that it was the opposite made me really intrigued and made me want to look more into this issue.
All right, and let's go Kirti.
Oh, so I didn't really touch on this in my presentation, but when I was looking at the collocations for our data, I noticed that a lot of the subjects that people were talking about were like about specific products. Like one of the keywords that I searched was oil. And rather than talking about like oil drilling, oil spills, oil pollution, or yeah, people talked about like oil products, like palm oil and skin products. So yeah, I didn't really touch on this in the presentation, but people are more likely to talk about like products on Twitter than environmental issues. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting things to see about like what people are more interested in regarding the keywords that I searched up.
All right, and Achyut.
Yeah, so in my case, for sure, I would say the diary of Alexei Poproshin, because it's super interesting seeing like the first, like I guess the first ever, or I guess the first recorded collection of a person who had schizophrenia. Because it was super interesting, like seeing his symptoms and seeing how he described it, and especially because it was in his own words, so it wasn't like super accurate, but then it was just cool to see how he how he said his life was like with schizophrenia.
All right, thank you. I was muted for a second there. Anybody else? Apparently, we do have a specific section for question and answers. So if you'd like to drop anything in there. Kirthi, did you include palm oil in your research?
Sorry, what?
Did you include palm oil in your research?
Oh no, I did not. So what I did was I searched up oil as a general keyword to see if any discussion would be related to how oil has an impact on the environment. I was not specifically looking for palm oil, mainly like stuff related to oil drilling and spills.
I have another question for you because your research really intrigued me. You said that you like looked at like about 2 million. Did you actually look at 2 million tweets?
Oh, so that's a good question. So what happened was first, after we collected the 2 million tweets, we had to take out the tweets that did not contain any location information because that's like the key aspect of our study. So I did not like read all of them, but we used the summaries in the data to like get, like I said, we looked at the top 30 collocations, like not all of them. So we just saw what was most prevalent, and in the graph that I showed everyone, like you could see how prevalent like the most common collocations were. So yeah, I did not look at all of the data, but I looked at the most common stuff that appeared. So yeah, I didn't look at that many tweets overall.
All right, Kirthi, another question for you. Soil degradation. Was there anyone actually talking about it on Twitter?
Oh yeah, so for soil degradation, we found that rather than people talking about like soil degradation, there was more stuff about like farming practice. Like people talked about soil carbon, like the carbon in the soil, and also carbon sequestration. Soil was one of our more specific keywords, so more people were likely to talk about it in an environmental sense. So yeah, there were a lot of people who were talking about soil health, especially in places like the Midwest where there's more farming and stuff.
Just another comment, soil degradation and global warming are connected.
Mhm.
Forests are destroyed and converted to farmlands.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, some people did mention climate change in the soil collocations, which connects to like what you just asked. Like, because I know that like soil like farming sequesters carbon into the ground, and when like the land is not treated properly, that carbon is released, which contributes to climate change. So yeah, there were a few mentions of climate change, but like I said, environmental issues did not dominate the conversation, unfortunately. So yeah.
All right, thank you. With a few more seconds, see if anybody wants to throw any other questions in there.
Oh, I have a question for Joy.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in your study, were you ever looking at like your own school, or were you doing research on other schools?
I was looking at research for the entire Houston Independent School District. Now, how I got interested on this subject was from a counselor of an HISD school specifically, but I felt that my research should be really broad, and so I decided that I was going to get data pertaining to the entire Houston Independent School District.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. If you'd like, I can leave this up to our student presenters. We can leave the panel open for another 10 minutes if anybody comes up with some questions, or we can shut it down early. I'm going to leave it up to you. This is your show. This is your time to shine. So
What do you guys think?
I'll try to think of more questions.
or now that I've put you on the spot and you're like you're a little scared to answer, we can just shut it down if you'd like. You've all done a fantastic job. Oh, wait, we got one more question in the. What was the most challenging part of your research? Let's start with Achyut.
Yeah, so for me, I would say these concepts were all like somewhat new to me. So for me, just like researching them and understanding it for me was kind of hard, but then over time it got easier as I did more research.
Joy?
For me, the biggest challenge for me was finding data for the entire Houston Independent School District, because I remember my mentor was very heavy on like major data to prove statement. And I went back and forth. I was thinking first that I was gonna look at data for the entire Houston Independent School District, but I thought that would be way too much information. But then I was like, okay, so maybe I'll look at 5 schools and then compare it to like 5 majority minority student schools versus 5 majority white schools. But in the end, I ended up finding 2 reports about the Houston Independent School District that provided me with the most amazing data. And so, yeah, most challenging was trying to find data for the entire Houston Independent School District to prove mine. And also it was to get support too, because I was trying to email schools when I was like, when I had the idea to look at 5 schools that had minority students and 5 schools that had majority white students, I would try to email the schools, but I felt like the schools wouldn't want to like reveal this information because that would make them look bad, and that would make the Houston Independent School District look bad. So they wouldn't want to reveal this information to me. So I had many setbacks, but in the end I was able to find data to prove this issue.
All right, and Kirthi?
I think, yeah, I also had a similar issue like regarding collecting data. The issue wasn't like where to find the data because we were able to just get it from Twitter, but mainly like I utilized different code like computer programs like or programming languages, sorry, like Python and R to collect the data. And it just took some time to get used to how to use those programs. And another thing was when collecting data from Twitter, there's actually like a limit on how much data you can collect in like in a certain amount of time. For example, you have to you have to wait for 15 minutes before you can collect more data for like certain amounts of data. So since I was collecting so much, we had to like come up with a program to like collect it consistently. And I think that was a really lengthy process. So yeah, mainly the coding stuff.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Mr. Quinn. Will we get
Yes.
our feedback like tomorrow, today, or like when, like our feedback and the announcements of the
That I don't know. I don't know when you will be getting feedback for that. Yeah, I unfortunately have no information on that. I wish I did. I don't know. Corey, do you have any information on that? Okay. Corey says feedback is due at the end of this next week. So I imagine you'll probably be hearing back with feedback within a week or two. All right. Oh, well, I guess we can close it out. We're approaching at 1:40, which is the end of this session. So we'll close it out for today. Thank you all again. Excellent job from all of our student presenters. You did an amazing job today. Thank you to all of our attendees for asking questions and engaging with our students. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Corey, for judging this panel. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the symposium. All right. All right. Thank you all.
All right,
you.
bye.
Bye.
You guys, bye.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Have a great one. Yep.